So, I recently came across a new article on, quote, anti-capitalist investing. According to the piece, a, quote, small but growing number of wealthy people are seeking a more radical approach to investing. Some call it the seemingly contradictory term anti-capitalist investing, others refer to it as, quote, transformative investing. In general, proponents are going beyond merely disincentivizing unethical behavior in companies. They're trying to shift more of the balance of financial power into the hands of the working class, transforming an economic system that they believe has unjustly given just a few people control over a majority of capital. Some investors want to spend down their wealth through anti-capitalist investing, while others still want to get a return on their investment, but make sure these investments are into ventures they feel promote social justice. Many of these bold new anti-capitalist investors hail from a group called Resource Generation, which has been the subject of many glowing profiles in the media over the past few years. The group, which describes itself as, quote, young people with wealth and class privilege in the US, appears to be made up of the most enlightened rich people in the world. On their site, you can find enthusiastic support for reparations, pledges to pay rent to Native American tribes for being on their land, and talk of community care and mutual aid. According to their mission statement, they seek to, quote, transform the philanthropic sector towards redistribution rather than charity. But the problem with these new, supposedly radical and unconventional philanthropists is that their very model of so-called redistribution, no matter how dressed up in social justice language it is, and no matter how guilty these people feel about their money, entrenches the power of the capitalist class rather than breaking it. So first, some background. Our current philanthropic system was born, surprise, surprise, during the first Gilded Age, when industrial robber barons started charitable foundations in order to stave off brewing social unrest and deflect attention from how they had amassed their giant fortunes in the first place. These Gilded Age charities directed some money towards solving the social ills of the day, while of course also conveniently serving as tax shelters for their wealthy founders. Now, the new generation of so-called anti-capitalist investors have been eager to insist that they're nothing like these bad old philanthropists. After all, some of them want to give away their entire fortunes. They support Black-led and Native-led organizing. They use phrases like systemic change and racial capitalism and say they're, quote, working in solidarity with poor and working class people. However, there are some fundamental ways in which their radical new philanthropy ends up looking quite a lot like the philanthropy of the robber barons. First and foremost is this: private philanthropy of any kind runs against and even undermines democracy. That's because the public has no say over how philanthropic funds are used. Instead, elite donors and small boards of trustees decide how foundations and nonprofits alike spend their money, which of course means that wealthy individuals and organizations, from Mackenzie Scott to George Soros to the Ford Foundation to even, yes, Resource Generation, are able to exert undue influence on politics and public life by directing vast sums of money toward causes they deem noble, without any input or oversight whatsoever from average voters or the vast majority of working people. What's more is that philanthropy functions as yet another tax advantage for the wealthy. Every time an anti-capitalist investor funnels his or her money into a foundation or nonprofit, or makes a tax-deductible donation, they're effectively reducing their own tax burden and, by extension, reducing funding for actual public goods like infrastructure, social services, and public education. According to one estimate, philanthropic institutions' tax breaks cost the US around $50 billion in lost tax revenue each year. So in other words, these young anti-capitalist investors might be creating or donating to slightly different charities and nonprofit organizations than their parents, but at the end of the day, the very nature of philanthropic giving keeps the money they're theoretically trying to, quote, redistribute very far from actual public control. And finally, the entire project of anti-capitalist investing obscures the foundations of our deeply unequal economy. To put it bluntly, some guilty rich people deciding to give away all the money in their trust funds won't actually do anything to transform the capitalist system that made them or their families rich in the first place, because it won't change the fact that under capitalism, the vast majority of us create wealth through our labor, while a small number of capitalists capture that wealth as profit. If one capitalist benevolently decides to stop exploiting his or her workers, or gives away all their money, their business will of course cease to function, and another capitalist will simply take their place. This illustrates the shortcomings of a certain type of enthusiasm for redistribution that has grown over the past few years. For one thing, these days redistribution seems to mean literally anything liberals want it to, from mutual aid to interpersonal Venmo reparations to supposed radical philanthropy. But none of these instances of so-called redistribution change our dependence on the market. Actually moving toward a more democratic economy, or achieving, quote, an equitable distribution of wealth, land, and power, as Resource Generation likes to put it, means decommodifying necessities like housing, expanding public ownership of energy and other utilities, heavily regulating the business and financial sector, and drastically increasing taxes on the wealthy. In any case, I think it goes without saying that we should be very, very wary of anyone claiming that capitalist class do-gooders are going to lead us to a fairer economic system. An advisor who works for the self-described anti-capitalist wealth management firm Cordata told Vox, quote, "Sometimes when we use the language of anti-capitalist investing, people say it's a paradox. I think that comes from a place of people believing that there's no real alternative to capitalism. Make no mistake, there is an alternative to capitalism, but it won't be ushered in by the self-flagellating children of the rich or their radical philanthropy schemes." If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.